after your period, you enter the season of winter, which is the follicular phase. So that is when your hormones are low and it seems like nothing is happening on the surface, which kind of is what's going on in winter in the environment. It's cold and quiet. Ovulation is stimulated by the spike in estrogen. Yeah, it's the season of communion. It's the season of community. It's the season of getting together with your girlfriends. It's the season of like, yeah, you're really like ovulation is the thing that we do as women that, men don't do that. And so it's the girls just want to have fun season.
Yes. And I have to say, by the way, I wouldn't have known right off the bat that she was introverted because you were like, you should have me on your podcast. And my wife and I were like, I think I'm going to talk about menstrual cycles.
Yeah. Well, I so appreciate it.
Welcome to The Rich Dawn, where eternal beatitude begins in this life. I'm Kyle Dean, and today I have with me Annie Schuler, a Catholic wife and mother, a biologist, and an author. Annie, how are you today?
Good. And how are you?
I'm doing so well. Thank you so
Good.
much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, 100%. And this is the book right here. It's called Woman of All Seasons, The Symbolism of the Menstrual Cycle. And with today's conversation, we're going to, embark in the feminine genius. And, although this is really suited to younger girls and women, as you had mentioned to me offline, I think we both kind of agreed we would just say up front that, it's a conversation that I think that younger girls can tune into, but, maybe with some parental advisement just to do that together. And with that caveat in mind, let's get into it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I wrote this with especially the young single woman in mind, but I tried to make it applicable to women of all ages. And so obviously for the young girls, I want to propose it to their moms first and have their moms involved in the conversation because obviously their moms are going to be guiding them into their journey of womanhood and all that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. And I can sense right off the bat that some people be like, wow, like a man being involved in the conversation as well. And absolutely, like for multiple reasons, because it's the parents that form the children first and foremost. And that is the building block of all society. So I also encourage the men to just to really just to make sure that you have a level of intentionality and attunement to the feminine genius, because you know what I mean? It's 50% of what humanity is. And so, a little about me, I was raised by a woman. And, so I grew up in a household like that. And so I just have such a level of comfort about this subject. And, I've ran into a bunch of guys out there. I'm thinking of an uncle, you know who you are, that, they kind of have this sense of, oh, that girl stuff is just girl stuff. I don't really want to hear about it. And I kind of challenge that viewpoint because I just, I think that can get in the way of, the father's role in all of that as well. But as you had mentioned, it's really like no one can speak to this like the mother and like women themselves. So please share with us, kind of the thesis of this book. What inspired you to take on this subject? Obviously, you're a biologist by trade, so you have a high level of competency in this area.
Yeah, so when I was in school at Franciscan studying biology, I was learning all of this about the reproductive cycle, and then the female body specifically. And I just thought to myself, this is information that really should be shared, that should become a knowledge, and it's not. I'm learning this at a college level, but this college level knowledge, it's possible to make it approachable for the average Sue, I guess, instead of the average Joe. But and that was kind of my goal. And so my senior year at Franciscan, I read an essay by Monsignor Philip Riley, and I had gone on retreats with him because he's big in the pro-life movement. So we had gone on sort of pro-life retreats, I guess, if you want to call it that. And so I read an essay that he wrote, and he equated the menstrual cycle to the four seasons. And then I was also big into TED Talks when I was in college, and I listened to a TED Talk from a woman named Sinu Joseph, and she is a menstrual health educator from India. And she had a TED Talk about the four seasons of the cycle. And I was so taken aback because these two people who like are so different, seem so different and from the opposite ends of the world, were kind of saying the same thing about the menstrual cycle. And it was lining up with what I was learning in school. So then after school, I did a lot of reading, and things just kind of like were clicking into place. And so I was like, this is, this is like a great way. This is a great way for all of this biological information to be conveyed. And so then, kind of the word symbolism, finally is what was the last puzzle piece. I was like, oh, these are all the symbols of the cycle. This is like the because our physiology can seem very unseen. It can seem very invisible. And so these are the signs that make the invisible visible, if that makes sense. And it
Yeah.
can bring all of this into better understanding for us.
So, I go to Franciscan as well. I'm almost done with the theology masters, and so we're both we hearken from that cloth, and I have so many questions. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind as a theologian when you said what you just said is how we veil what is sacred.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And women are
Mm-hmm.
sacred. You think of St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 11, how he talks about women veiling and all of
Yeah.
this, the symbolism that goes into that.
Yeah.
But there needs to be a way to bring, like you said, the invisible to the fore, at least within the right context, within the right, company, within modesty and decorum,
Yeah.
to be able for people to know like which way is up, down, left, and right.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where the seasons kind of come in to
Yeah.
contextualize.
Yes. Yes. And that was part of my goal, was to be able to talk about the seasons and say like, to kind of colloquialize it. So say like, oh yeah, I'm in summer right now, so I need a little bit of space. Or, I'm in spring, so let's get together for dinner or whatever. So it's like, um and that kind of will make more sense as we go into like what each
Right.
season is. But
Yeah.
um so to give it kind of a language so that you don't have to be, your as your uncle was is kind of like off-putted by girl stuff. It's like there is like I don't want to be blasé about stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Losing track of my words here, but giving a layer of vocabulary so that you have a way to talk about it without being too blasé or something like that.
Yeah. 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 The way I would say it is without, exercising a lack of that decorum, because
Sure.
modesty and decorum pertains to speech
Yeah.
just as much as it does in terms of the way that we dress and the way that we present ourselves in other areas. That's the virtue of temperance.
Yes.
Right. And so we're called to live a life of intentionality and to maximize our stats in all of the virtues. And this is all about the feminine genius
Mm.
here. So, um, and what you've done is really entrepreneurial as well. So
Mm.
I know, like, to build the bridge with my existing viewers and listeners and the things that, humble, modest beginnings and my small but incredible audience that I'm very grateful for, there's an entrepreneurial component
Mm.
to the life coaching that I bring for people and,
Mm-hmm.
and helping to empower them. And you've done that
Mm.
already. Like, maybe you could speak to that a little bit before we actually get into the content
Sure.
itself, like a meta-analysis on, like, what did you learn? Because I doubt that you were taught in biology studies about how to like publish.
Yes. So I went to the Given Conference, which is a Catholic women's leadership conference. So I highly recommend that. It was started by a group of sisters. So it is very anchored in the church. And it's basically they started this conference in order to um, in order to encourage and enrich women and their gifts in the church. And so so you come to the conference bringing an action plan. And so I went to the conference bringing my manuscript because I needed guidance on how to exactly what you said. I studied biology, so I have no idea how to get a manuscript out into the world.
Yes.
And so I needed guidance. And so I went to that conference and learned so much at the conference. And then you're assigned a mentor for a year after that conference. And so she helped me, and that was the biggest thing that went into getting this out into the world. So I highly recommend the Given Conference for ladies out there. If you have something that you like, you have a seed and you need help watering it and letting it grow, that's a great place to go. So then the conference actually, most of the talks were just nurturing yourself as a person, which is part of their foundation, is that they, God has given you gifts as a woman. And so, in order to serve Him and serve the church, using your talents, um, you know, uh, we want you to bring your specific charisms into the world. So, um, yeah, so that's I learned a lot. And then there was also talks about business, and so that was very helpful as well, practically. So that was a huge part, yeah, as I said, of getting this into the world. And then my sister studied graphic design at Franciscan, and so she helped me with the kind of technical formatting and editing and all that kind of
So that would
stuff.
be
So
Molly.
yeah, my
She's
sister
mentioned in
Molly.
here.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She did
yes,
the photos as well,
yes.
or
She took two of the photos, and then I took the rest, and then she is featured in one of the photos.
yes.
And yeah,
Shout out to
she did.
Molly.
Yeah.
She's incredible with kids.
Yes. Yeah, she is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
And so wow, so three humans, all from Franciscan, three completely distinct degrees. I only know what I know in the
Mhm.
theology world and also online, so I wasn't as attuned to campus culture as you were.
Mhm.
Um, what about the way that you studied biology? How was it informed? Like, does
Mhm.
Franciscan overtly bring a faith-based sense to all
Mhm.
the degrees that they have there? Or do they kind of like section that like theology is within theology?
Right.
And like, I wonder what your experience was like there. And then from what you did learn in whatever way that they presented it, when you kind of had that moment where you were like, I need to make this into a book. Like, I need to get this information out there because it's not as available to people as it ought to be.
Right, right. That's a great question. So, I looked at a lot of different schools in addition to Franciscan, and Franciscan was always kind of on the back burner as I was looking for colleges, because I thought Franciscan would be good for my faith, but I do have a very strong faith and strong family background. In
You don't
regards to
necessarily
the
need
faith,
college to give that to you.
exactly.
Right.
And so I was looking at other schools more, because that I assumed that they had better biology programs, and so I was like, I I knew Franciscan alum, and so they were encouraging me to go to Franciscan. My confirmation sponsor specifically, but I was like, it's not going to be that great for biology. But then it just came down to the wire when I had to decide. I got accepted into a bunch of schools, and
Nice.
I had to decide what school to go to, and I was just like, I'm supposed to go to Franciscan. That's just the way it is. It's just the natural place for me. So I went, and Franciscan was the best place to learn biology. They have an excellent biology program, and I had amazing research experiences. Um, and I was published in two research papers. So that's an amazing opportunity for the college level. And then my I learned more about my faith from my biology professors, or maybe as much. Um, and then I also took theology classes. You do have to with any major at Franciscan. Um, so
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. That's cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I definitely did take theology classes and philosophy classes, and they were some of my favorites. So I took a Bachelor of Arts in biology, which was a unique opportunity because I didn't want to take computer science. I'm not a techie person.
Sure.
I'm a biology person. I'm a science person, but not a techie person. So I took a so I did a Bachelor of Arts, and that allowed me to take a little bit more philosophy and languages. And so I learned just as much about my faith from my biology professors as I did from my theology and philosophy classes. So Franciscan is an amazing place for the integration of faith and sciences. And even my professors would have talks on the side, and we would attend those for extra credit and things like that. And one professor had a talk on the relationship of philosophy and science, and so we just were kind of immersed in that whole mentality that truth is one thing, and faith and science come at it from different directions, but we're all going to the same truth. So that was
Right.
just a great environment for me, and a great environment for me to learn the sciences. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I wish I could say, yeah, I'm not a techie person either, but that would not be
No, yeah,
completely
and that's a
accurate.
gift. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is. But it's not my highest expression or form of contribution. It's a weird way that I kind of came into building these bridges between faith and science as well, and my own conversion, because I went to a tech school, and they a very prestigious school. They actually make you take classes at the beginning. They don't let you choose what you're going to take,
Mm,
and then they let you build from there. And so I was placed into intro to philosophy, even though it was a completely secular school, like not faith based at all.
mm-hmm.
And so in that sense, it wasn't the greatest thing for my own development, but the philosophy was one of the biggest seeds planted, because it's really like, St. Thomas Aquinas says, it's like, theology and philosophy are like peas in a pod. One is the handmaiden of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and of course, like you think of St. Anselm, who says, like, theology is like faith seeking understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the bridge between reason and theology. And when you have the wings of really philosophy and history, they inform faith, theology, but then also its connection to the sciences, all the different sciences and arts, right? They
Mm-hmm.
all roll up into philosophy. So in
Mm-hmm.
that sense, as I
Mm-hmm.
kept going, I was like, I don't really identify so much with the tech component, as like it was almost like an applied metaphysics degree,
Yeah.
and then it ended up building the bridge for ultimately theology. So I resonate with what you're saying. I
Mm.
understand, and how it's such a gift sometimes, because those were almost ancillary or extra on top of everything you learned with biology,
Mhm.
but they helped build a bridge to a wider understanding of just like all of the human experience,
Mhm.
and like contextualizing it in that way. So that's really cool. And where did the aha moment come, if that's even how you would qualify it, where you were like, okay, I'm learning this philosophy, I've got the theology, I'm predominantly focused on biology, the science of that. Although you said it was an arts, biology of arts
I
degree.
did, yeah, so I have a biology of
Interesting.
arts in
I would have
biology.
thought that would have been science.
Yes.
Was there a distinction there?
It's so it was just a distinction in my course, in the courses that I took. I took more languages, and I didn't have to take computer science.
Right,
Was the only
right.
difference. So that
Interesting.
I didn't even know that that was an option. They just, you know, in our freshman orientation, they had a sheet of paper that said if you want to do biology Bachelor of Arts or biology Bachelor of Science, and these are the courses you would have to take. And I was like, sign me up for the Bachelor of Arts because then I can take Spanish and I don't have to worry about taking computer science. So
Right.
it just worked out.
Oh, habla español también.
Yeah, yeah,
Me olvidé,
yeah.
pero muy bien. Yeah, I studied that as well. So that's really cool. And then something happened where you were like, this is information that really needs to be conveyed
Yeah,
about the menstrual cycles. Like,
yeah.
when did that happen? How did that happen?
I think it was like, um, I definitely, so it was my sophomore year. Oh, I'm like forgetting. I believe it was my sophomore year. I took developmental anatomy with Dr. Derek Dorosky, and he is such a great he's such a great man, and has such a heart for the pro life movement as well as for the feminine genius, and for the yeah for the advocating of information like this being spread. So I did send my manuscript to him to have him double check all of my biology. I cite him heavily, and the chart that I have in the book is based on the chart that he used in our classes
Aha.
on page 3.
Very cool.
So, he was a big inspiration for this book as well. So, and it was so great. I'm so glad I sent my manuscript to him because he sent it back with a bunch of corrections and, on all the biology points. So that was very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I'm thank you, Dr. Derek. And I think that that helps to build a bridge too for anybody that's like, oh, this is girl stuff. It's like, no, I mean, I bet there were probably
Yeah.
more men than just him in the program, maybe,
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
not. And so, like, what would you say is the way for men and women to converge on a subject like the feminine genius while
Mm,
observing decorum and not becoming blasé?
that is a very interesting question. Um, how can we converge? That it's kind of the the point of life, and this is going to kind of get into a little bit of philosophy as well. The or maybe metaphysics might be the more appropriate word, but the coming together of the feminine and the masculine, that kind of is like the point of life, because God created us male and female for a reason, for some reason. I don't know the reason, but he created us male and female for a reason, because we're both made in his image and likeness, and then he created us a male and a female, but then our the point is to come together, to come back together, right? So in the whole kind of new agey world, people are like, oh, you want to get in touch with your feminine side or get in touch with your masculine side or whatever. So I've based on what I've like learned J from John Paul the Great, is that he would never speak of women in a masculine. He would never use adjectives interchangeably, for example. So
Sure.
he would never say that a woman had a masculine side within her, whatever. So like I'm not sure that that's so stepping back from that kind of new agey way to put it, but the coming together of the masculine and the feminine. And I listened to I went through I went through a kick where I was listening to videos about like stories and the symbolism behind fairy tale stories and stuff like that. I thought that was pretty interesting, and a lot of the themes in like fairy tales and like old stories is like feminine symbols and masculine symbols coming together, and the resolution of the story is the coming together. And so many stories are like end in marriages and end in weddings and stuff like that. Pride and Prejudice, great one. Great example.
Oh,
Even like
sure.
even Les Miserables, for example. um War and Peace, for example, they all end in marriages and family and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have like a great formula for how we can come together, as male and female and as feminine and masculine. But I think that that's kind of the point of life, and the journey of life is to like figure out how to come together.
Well, and I think you just nailed it in the sense that I think the antithesis of this conversation or the tension that you find in the culture today that makes it that frames it into a potential point of contention is
Mm.
this whole idea of like, of course, feminism would be an extremist, expression of not the feminine genius, but like,
Mhm.
you know, an unfortunate turning of that, like an inversion of that. And then their kind of uh modality is, you know, like my body, my choice, and like me being a woman, like that's my um you know, that's my business, and a man has no, you know, should not be a part of that conversation. And
Yeah.
there's this wall, there's this separation, there's this us and them
Yeah.
mentality, which obviously doesn't serve the purpose of human dignity,
Right.
which I
Right.
think you're touching on. But then also, you know, you actually jogged my memory. John Paul II wrote Mulieris Dignitatis
Yes.
on the dignity of women, and it's just a phenomenal work. And he doesn't blend the gender roles. You're right. He does say though in there, he just acknowledges what, of course, it says in sacred scripture, Saint
Mm.
Paul, like there will be neither male nor female
Mm.
in the final analysis, which is strange because it's like,
Mm.
wait a minute, like because we're talking about, you know, how we're distinct but complementary,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
yet there's this like ultimate expression that is transcendent.
Mm.
And the way that John Paul emphasized it in that work is that um that God as a divine being is really neither male nor female,
Right.
which is just, it's wild. It's wild to
Yes.
think of because, you know, and I think because that's one of the low hanging fruits for, like, you know, again, like an extremist expression where they're like, oh, we have to war against, like, say, the patriarchy. Like, you're
Yeah.
speaking
Yeah.
about God in a masculine form.
Right.
It's like, but yeah, but at the end of the day, like, God is neither actually.
Right. Right.
And when we
Yeah.
come to heaven, there's going to be a sense of unity that's so transcendent that it like transcends whether or not we're male or female, although we will still have our bodies, our
Mm.
resurrected bodies, and they will be male and female depending on
Mhm.
obviously, you know, how God made us now.
Mhm.
So it's this weird like mystery that
Yeah.
combines hopefully complementarity,
Yeah.
you know. And you also said, you know, I don't know maybe exactly how or why we should come together. I think in the, you know, you're a newer parent, I'm a parent. I think God brought men and women together to strip us of our selfishness.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, because it's
Oh
not
yeah.
all about us anymore. When all of a sudden you have another human being to take care of,
Oh yeah.
it's like it's incredible, it's beautiful, it's challenging,
Yes.
it's rewarding.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
it's just
Definitely.
amazing. But we're called to
Yeah.
create.
Yes. And so to touch on the male and female thing one more time, Sister Mary Prudence Allen, I don't know if you've heard of her. She wrote, basically, it's the magnum opus of her career. It's called The Concept of Woman. So she's a philosopher, and this was basically her dissertation. Um, so she has analyzed philosophers from the ancient Greeks to modern day. So it's a 3-volume work. It's
Wow.
gigantic. It
Systematic.
is systematic. She was a mathematician before she was a philosopher, so she's very systematic. And so it's basically um, everything in philosophy about woman, everything that philosophers have said about women. And so it's fascinating. So then she's come up with, so she's analyzed every philosopher, and then kind of put them into 3 categories. The first being sex unity theory, which would be Plato. So he says that um, there's no difference between male and female, and therefore they're equal in dignity, but there's no difference. Then a sex polarity theory would be, for example, Aristotle, and then also coming into a little bit more modern age, Simone de Beauvoir. So man and woman are opposites, and one is better than the other.
Hmm.
And so that's that contrary um, view. And then the third theory would be sex complementary theory. And so that is man and woman are different but equal in dignity. And so that was um, is obviously it was what is upheld by the church. And so yeah, so it's fascinating. We are male and female, and we are made in the image and likeness of God as male and female. And even though God is not male or female, but he made us as male and female in his image to reflect some aspect of him. And so, and that is a misunderstanding of people coming into the faith. We always say him. We always refer to God as Father, um, because of the expressions from sacred scripture and from our finite understanding as humans.
Right. And the notion of being a giver,
Mhm.
right? Because like men give, women receive. So in a certain sense, it connects in that way in terms of being a creator. But you know what? Some people would charge Francis of Assisi of being New Age
Yeah.
because he actually spoke about how men are to mother,
Yeah.
which is weird. It's like almost like
Well,
transgender language, but that's my patron in addition to our patron by virtue of our school. Like, and he actually he kind of wanted to like again bring us into a transcendence
mhm.
of how like we just have so much to learn from each other.
Yes.
Like you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not St. Francis alone, it's St. John of the Cross, I believe, also use similar language.
Yeah.
And so
It's mystical.
it is. It is.
Yeah, he's a deep mystical writer.
Yes. So it's um right, and especially when you get into the kind of more metaphysical level of masculine and feminine, there is such an intertwining, and there's such a um yeah, we are meant to be united. We're distinct, but we're meant to be united. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great things to think about.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Well, thank you for
Yeah.
answering because, I think that helps people to realize it's like this is a conversation for both sexes
Yeah.
to have together. This isn't like something that's exclusive to one or the other. And
Yeah.
like you said, Dr. Derek and others, like it takes all of us to be able to acknowledge, seek to understand, and
Mhm.
then live out the feminine genius.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Women, by virtue of living it and being it and teaching us of your
Mhm.
wisdom that you
Mhm.
uniquely have, and then men to be complementary to that.
Mm. Yeah.
So, with that in mind, maybe you can touch on just what does the feminine genius mean to you, and then maybe we can put some flesh on this specific topic.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that was one of the talks at the Given Retreat that I went to was about the feminine genius and the kind of the 3 points. And it is, um, yeah, the feminine genius it is kind of a mysterious thing that you kind of discover within yourself as you grow as a woman. But um, I guess to me, it would be um, development of compassion, um, development of understanding, and kind of a development of like self gift, I would say. I would say those are kind of the three key things.
Which especially happens in spring.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So let's pivot.
Yeah.
We've alluded to these seasons.
Yes.
And let's get into that now. So you break down the menstrual cycles
Yes.
by relating them to the symbolism, maybe even archetype,
Yeah.
if you will, of the four seasons
Yes.
that we all experience.
Yes.
And you begin not in spring, but in autumn.
Yes.
So let's start there. We can start with
Yes.
what does that mean, why, and then what are the rest of them and how does it connect?
Yes. So medically, you start tracking your cycle with the first day of your period. It's easy because it's the first. Your bleeding is an easy sign to read for women. Um, Technically, when when a girl is entering puberty, your body starts in the follicular phase, which is winter. We'll talk about that. The ovaries are developing an egg follicle, and so then ovulation will happen, and then the luteal phase will happen, and then menses happens. And so, but that's menses is the first thing you see. It's the first visible thing. So that's where we start tracking the cycle. And the symbolism of that is actually beautiful because autumn is kind of the end of the year seasonally. And so it's a sense of like beginning at the end, which is has beautiful symbolism. And so so your period, the week of your period is symbolized by the season of autumn. It's symbolized the falling red leaves are, a good visual to remind you of the shedding of the endometrial lining, the bleeding, and and it's a time of rest and renewal. And so we're shedding what we don't need anymore, and we're preparing for new life. And so that's what autumn is in nature as well. The trees are shedding um, the leaves, and they're preparing for the new life that will then happen as the seasons progress. And so that's why the symbolism there is beautiful, and it's a time of rest and removal of negativity and rejuvenation for us as women. Yeah. So then I'll just go straight through the other seasons if that's good with you.
Let's go.
All right.
I'm in.
Yeah. So then after your period, you enter the season of winter, which is the follicular phase. So that is when your hormones are low, and it seems like nothing is happening on the surface, which kind of is what's going on in winter in the environment. It's cold and quiet. Your body temperature, your basal body temperature is lower, and your hormones are lower, and so you have this like clarity of mind, which we'll get into why hormones affect your clarity of mind in the later seasons. But during winter, your hormones are low, so you have this clarity of mind. But then you also have this inner creativity, because that is when the ovaries are developing the egg follicles. The egg follicles are maturing. They're all kind of maturing, and they're all kind of sending out signals to each other to suppress one another. So it's this kind of survival of the fittest within the within the ovaries. And so the cell that develops the quickest will be the one that ends up being released during ovulation. But so during winter, you have this inner creativity, which is seen in the winter in our environment, because you have this growth under the surface. You have the seeds that are under in the soil, under the snow. It's all waiting for the revival of spring.
It's like a period of dormancy, but maybe rest, but not necessarily death,
Right.
which, these are
Right.
different symbolic expressions of winter. There's
Sure.
there's activity going on, but it's kind of
Sure.
latent.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's unseen. It's hidden. Um, and then, um, yeah, any discharge that a woman may be experiencing, it depends on the number of cells, the quantity of cells in the cervical canal that you have. Um, some women produce a lot more cervical mucus and some less. And so during the season of winter, it could be dry, it could be seem barren. And then for some women, it could be like a thicker white discharge, which is also symbolic of the snow that we see during winter, especially up here in Buffalo.
Right. I
Um,
learned so much about this when we went through our natural family planning
sure.
classes, right? That's another incredible experience for husband and wife to come together and to truly understand, appreciate, and embrace the
Yeah.
feminine genius.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and so it kind of like that's kind of where you get into the nitty-gritty, and you're learning about these biological processes that, especially for men, they had no idea what was going on. And then oftentimes for women, a lot of women that I talk to, they see these things that their body is doing, and they don't know what it is. And their mothers tell them, X, Y, and Z, but maybe they were misinformed or whatever. And so that is what, all of these signs that our body gives us are signposts for the seasons that our body is going through. And so it's important to learn what they are, and then again to have this kind of symbolism is great as a memory device as well. So you may be seeing white discharge, and you think, oh, okay, snow, winter. It's a good memory device to help guide you along your seasons.
It's
Yeah.
really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. So then your body goes through the low hormone phase of winter. The ovaries are developing the egg follicles, and then finally, singular, maybe sometimes multiple egg follicles are developed and mature.
Sometimes octoplets.
I know. Yeah, well, maybe that's not necessarily natural, but um, yeah. So then your pituitary gland releases follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And so that signals the ovary to release the mature egg cell. So then the egg cell is released, and that is ovulation. And so the cervical mucus is going to change. It's going to thin out and become less acidic. So it's going to be more receptive. Um, and and then estrogen is also going to peak during that season. So the spike in estrogen is going to raise your basal body temperature. So ovulation can't be predicted. The season before winter is the most variable phase of the menstrual cycle. For me specifically, I my cycle tends to be sensitive to whatever's going on in my life. I lived in an apartment building, and I had a friend who lived across the hall, and she moved out, and I was sad about the fact that she moved out, and my body responded to that, and so I had an extremely long cycle that month because my body was in kind of my body was responding to that and saying, okay, we don't need to focus on we need to focus on what's going on outside, and not we don't need to focus on the building blocks of life that our bodies produce. So
It's almost like a
um,
defense mechanism.
exactly.
Like, I'm gonna go into a safety mode.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So then ovulation um, can't necessarily be predicted unless you're really dialed into your cycle. You can get pretty close, but it's observed by the increase of the basal body temperature and the presence of the thin, watery cervical mucus. And so that
Which
is the
invokes notes
season.
of spring.
Exactly. That's the season of spring, that the watery cervical mucus is into reminds you of the rain that you experience during spring, and up here the flooding that we get from the melting snow. But
Yes.
and so the raising of your body basal body temperature also reminds you of the rising temperatures during spring in the environment. And so that's the season um, of revival and of connection and of vulnerability, and so that's a great time, not only connection with the opposite sex, but connection with um, loved ones, family and friends, and also connection with God. you know uh, this can be a great time of prayer for women, because we are in this receptive disposition, um, that just as a whole person, this it brings us all together. So then, after ovulation is going to be the luteal phase, and that is when the egg cell develops within a follicle, which is kind of like a bubble. So when the follicle opens, the egg cell is released, but the follicle still remains in the ovary, and that degenerates over time. And that's called the corpus luteum. That releases progesterone into the
Right.
body. And progesterone is an extremely powerful hormone. It affects every cell in the woman's body. And so I call this the season of summer because progesterone is going to increase your basal body temperature. Progesterone is also going to interact with the hypothalamus in the brain. And the hypothalamus is the emotion center. It's the hypothalamus is also the switchboard of the brain, but it's also the emotion center and the nurturing center. So that is going to be heightened during this season. So and your basal body temperature is going to rise. This is also going to affect your blood volume. Your blood volume increases during this time. So women may feel bloated and all these symptoms of PMS, that we call it today. But
Oh, and
it's
I can immediately tell you're not exactly adept to that, maybe. There might be better better ways to describe the biology and the physiology of that.
than using the word PMS. Or
Right.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Because of course, like it's kind of like how the culture just you mentioned earlier how if women don't understand this stuff, like if the mother doesn't have enough of an attunement to just help the daughter to know, like, hey, everything's all right here, like this is what
Yeah,
this means,
right,
and this is how to maximize flourishing in these seasons. It's like the stereotypical, like, oh, there's suddenly blood and I don't know what to do. It's like, no, I
right.
think there's more to it than that.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, like, there's more to it than just these cultural connotations of, oh, like a woman is overly emotional at this point or this or
Right.
that. No, there's something really beautiful going on here.
Yes.
There's a way
Yeah.
to harness it for good.
Yes. Yeah. Um, so the progesterone, the effect of progesterone on the brain also, um, I don't want to use the word inhibit, but your frontal cortex is a little bit less active during this time, and the back of your brain is a little bit more active. So the back of the brain is the more ancient part of the brain, and so that is um, where we have our instincts and where we have our recognition of patterns, which was super helpful for survival for primitive man. And so that is something that today the recognition of patterns is what we call feminine intuition. So it's the back of our brain is doing this work kind of for us, where we're seeing what is happening in our lives and we're making these connections. Well, our brain is, and we may not realize it, but then during this season, it's this time of powerful intuition that if we really lean into it, we can use it, through the grace of God, use it for the betterment of ourselves and others in our lives. And so this season is a highly emotional season, but it's a highly intuitive season as well. And so it's definitely um, so. Did you ever see the movie Moana?
Mm-mm.
Or yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, no, it's it's a Disney movie, so take it or leave it. But
Sure.
um, I, they had one character that was like the Mother Nature character who was, so the premise of the story is that the Mother Nature character, her heart was stolen and she became a lava monster. So I just think that that image was hilarious, but it fit so perfectly because during the season, we have this progesterone as the nurturing hormone, but if we are not practicing virtue, if we're not you know, if we're not practicing our faith, we can turn into the lava monster, versus the Mother Nature when we really um, tap into God's design for us as women, um, made in the image and likeness of Him as Creator. Um, it's that dichotomy, so we can tap into the positive side of this, or we can let the negative side of this, run away with us. So
And that's precisely what I meant by, the cultural stereotypes of being overly emotional. It's like, okay, but that's like a two-way street. One is, you know, for the woman to recognize, as you just aptly described, as with all humans, like we're called to a life of virtue,
mhm.
and therefore, depending on whatever season we're in, we want to allow for an environment to grow in that way. If a heightened sense of intuition is where we're at in this season,
Yeah,
then there's ways to exercise that in a virtuous manner. But then there's also, the other side of that is, for other people to be able to meet you where you're at
yeah,
and to foster that.
yeah,
And so it's a communal experience.
hmm,
And so it all goes back to virtue, like you just said. But it also is, I'm really touched by that. I don't know whether you would say that men have feminine intuition if they have good pattern recognition, or if that's you, because
no, no, that's it's a human thing. Like it's
okay.
definitely what makes
Yeah, I was
it's
in that moment. I was like, I think I have a lot of feminine intuition, but that's probably not accurate. So, anyways,
funny.
well, because you think of like the pareidolia effect and all these other phenomena that go into pattern recognition. And it is like you said, it's an instinctual primal thing, like because your cortex, like
Yeah.
isn't it like your brain stem that
It's the
connects into
whole
that.
back end of your brain. Yeah.
Right, because that formed before all the rest of this formed,
Yeah.
right? If you
Right.
think of, development, I'm not going to say evolution because people can take that or leave that too, but it's super interesting what you're saying because this kind of connects biology to neurology
Right. Right.
specifically. And you mentioned the hypothalamus, like they've noticed that some of the illnesses, even in sexual expression that have been going on, are an overly inflamed hypothalamus.
Mm, interesting. I
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah, well, that's maybe another topic for another time if you can look into that. But um, so just to complete the cycle here, can you speak to obviously when you're in summer, one of two things are happening.
Mm-hmm.
The egg is fertilized or it's
Mm-hmm.
not.
Mm-hmm.
So where does progesterone factor in one way or the other? Because you're only going through, the premenstrual if the egg's not fertilized.
Mm-hmm.
Something else could be happening otherwise. Either way,
Mm-hmm.
you're at a point where your temperature is increased, right?
Yes, yes. So your basal body temperature has increased. The endometrial lining is thickening in preparation for fertilization and for implantation. And then when that does not happen, um, progesterone falls, and that stimulates the endometrial lining to be sloughed off. And then so you go back to the beginning of the end, back to
Autumn.
autumn, which is the end of the cycle, which is the sloughing off of the endometrial lining, the removal of what is unneeded, the time of rest and rejuvenation. Um, and yeah, was there one more thing that you
Well,
mentioned?
it's just if a woman is pregnant at this
Oh,
point as
right.
opposed to if she's not.
Right. Yeah. So then, if she becomes pregnant, progesterone skyrockets. It increase. It goes off the
Because
charts.
you got to
So
nurture.
yes, exactly. So you're nurturing. So that's yeah, that's a whole nother. And uh I haven't done a lot of study into the physiology of pregnancy since graduating. I'm sure I have lots of notes on it from my biology degree, but yeah, I in my book specifically, I look at the menstrual cycle in and of itself.
Right.
So um, it is geared towards young women. It's geared towards um, sort of geared towards single women because in the Catholic world, I did see a lot of information available for NFP and for couples looking to conceive and all that kind of. And then I just saw that there was kind of a hole, there was kind of a gap for all of this information for single women, for the menstrual cycle in and of itself. And so that's kind of where I just wanted to come in and talk about the benefits of the menstrual cycle for you. It is proliferative, it is creative, it is part of what it is what enables us to bear life into this world as women. But we do that physically, and then we also do that spiritually. Every woman is called to be a spiritual mother, and so that's why I wanted to emphasize that part as well. Is that ovulation is a time of spiritual connection and spiritual vulnerability and things like that, um, as well as for married people.
Well, I mentioned how we went through the NFP, and yeah, young girls and single women don't need to worry about what you learn in that class in terms of like, clear as a time where it's like, listen, pregnancy is very, very possible
Mhm.
and everything else. But until you wait for your spouse,
Mm,
right, which is, of course, the only right way to live in accordance with God's design and God's plan, until that time comes, you still need to be able to kind of know like which way is up, down, left, and right. I'm very thankful that you brought it back to spring.
mm.
I wanted to hold my peace until you went through the whole cycle, but that was probably I actually read this book, and
Okay.
I think that was one of the most prolific aspects of it that touched me
Mm,
because it helps me to realize, like, look, okay, so I was called to the married state.
Mhm.
And obviously, I'm a husband, I'm a father of four, and I'm extraordinarily thankful for all of those life experiences that I now have. Of course, you don't have that until you have it. But there was a time when I thought that maybe I would become a monk or this or that or whatever, and I was open to it. So I have an attunement to like the religious life.
Mhm.
And when I think some people might miss that too. It's like almost like a knowledge gap of, look, some people are called to be like consecrated virgins.
Yeah.
Some people are called to the religious life in a certain way where they're never going to physically unite with someone of the opposite sex, but you're still spiritually united. We're all called to
Yes.
community. The Trinity is a community. And that really resonated with me when you touched on that, because I was like, whoa, like, you think of ovulation as a time to unite physically, but no, like religious sisters
Mhm.
are still going
Mhm.
through physiology,
Mhm.
but they're part of the community. They're connecting with
Mhm.
everybody.
Mhm.
So I just
Yeah.
really liked how you touched on that, because it again, it spiritualizes it to the point where it gives you a much more holistic perspective.
Yeah. 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 And so I didn't touch on it as we were going through, but I also bring in the symbolism of the human person. So I talk about the four parts of the human person: body, mind, spirit, and emotion.
Yes.
And so, the season of autumn, your period is symbolized by the body because you're very much grounded in your body. You're experiencing very physical signs, the blood and the cramps. And then the week after winter, your follicular phase is symbolized by the mind because, as we said, the hormones are low, progesterone is low, estrogen is low, and so you have this clarity of mind. You have this lack of brain fog that we experience later on. And so you have this kind of analytical aspect of your mind comes to the foreground, and so you're able to accomplish. And athletes, maybe experience better hand-eye coordination during this time, things like that. And your metabolism is kind of like working more like a man's in a certain degree, whereas a man's metabolism just like works all the time. um and then spring is then symbolized by the spirit, because this is the time of connection, and it's the time of vulnerability and of prayer, um, and and that's what I was reflecting on religious women, especially, and that they are called to the life of chastity. And so the menstrual cycle is not useless to them. The menstrual cycle is very much still part of who they are. um Even though it's not being used, quote unquote, even though you're physically not bearing children, this is very much a time for them to tap into their spiritual motherhood. That's what we learn from them, in that regard. And so then the luteal phase, or the season of summer, is then symbolized by emotion, the passions, the all of the emotions, and then sometimes, as we said, we get into, sometimes the rage comes in, but then sometimes the nurturing comes in and stuff like that. And that is where practicing a life of virtue can really, um help kind of steer your ship in that regard. But as we said, like, emotion is very valuable and intuition is very valuable, very all parts of being of the human person. So
Yeah, absolutely. And can you speak a little bit more to whether it's the biological processes that are taking place, and or just like maybe the psychology of it, where if you're in spring, like you just want to be around people.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
what is like what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, that's I've seen. It's funny, I have an Instagram account because that's a part of like marketing and stuff like that.
Of
So
course.
people
I
out
just got one
there,
too. It's weird.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, like I just got one. I'm learning how to use it.
yes, yeah. And there's all these techniques and stuff like that,
Sure.
for. But yeah, so I'm having to learn how to use it too. But I see these videos that people create that are actually hilarious. And they'll go through, one video was of a woman and she says um that goes through the different phases, and then she has a different outfit and she's in a totally, menstrual phase. She's wearing a red hoodie
She
and
doesn't have like a
she's,
lava outfit on, does she?
no, she didn't have a lava outfit on. Yeah. But yeah, and then her, her ovulation phase, she, had a cute pink dress and was like putting on lipstick, ready to go out, with her friends and stuff like that. And then the luteal phase comes next, and she's again like cowering in her room in a hoodie. But so it's just funny that it's yeah, it's funny to like take that comical side of the different phases. But it's true, yeah. Ovulation, it's stimulated by the spike in estrogen. The spike in estrogen affects our brain and affects our body. So we're yeah, it's the season of communion. It's the season of community. It's the season of getting together with your girlfriends. It's the season of like, yeah, you're really like, ovulation is the thing that we do as women that, men don't do that. And so it's it's the girls just want to have fun season.
Yes. Yes. Well, and
Yeah.
this goes a little bit beyond the scope of this book because maybe young girls don't need to get into it too deeply, but like the more you spend time with other women, you sync up.
Yeah, so there actually hasn't been scientific evidence. I don't know if it's really been studied.
Sure.
It's anecdotal for sure, though.
Yeah,
And
I'm
yeah.
actually glad you said that because sometimes people take that a step further and then they connect it to this like certainly not a Catholic understanding
Mm,
of like how it was when we were nomadic peoples and if
yeah.
we evolved and whatever all that looks like. And sometimes I hear some of these ideas of like the women, the more time that you spend around each other, you might sync up your cycles. And
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm,
relation and that like the alpha is the one that everyone else converges around, and then the connection with men in the group. And I'm like, sometimes when I hear people describe this stuff, I'm like, it sounds just a little animalistic to me
sure.
because it doesn't sound like it factors in the like the dignity that we have being in the image and likeness of God.
Mm,
And
sure.
so that's another thing that I really appreciated about like the niche or the space that you've crafted here, because it's a faith-based way, but a very scientific
Mm,
way to be able to articulate, like you said, that language of the invisible and making it relatable,
mm-hmm.
right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's through words, as we're doing
Mm-hmm.
now, whether it's through those videos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very much like those the balls on different lengths of string. I don't know what that
Oh, an
apparatus.
abacus?
Um
No, not the thing like math, right?
no,
No.
the one that you swing all the balls and then the pattern, I can't remember what the name of it, but it has a name.
Okay.
And so it's the thing, you swing all the balls and then they move in different patterns.
Okay.
And so sometimes they'll sync up and sometimes they're all completely different.
Yes.
Um, so the people have them on their desks, those things.
Yes. Well,
So I
yeah,
don't know what
no,
it's
an
called.
abacus is a mathematical tool, but
Yeah,
I
no,
know
it's
exactly what
it's
you're
not
talking
an
about.
abacus,
There's
but
usually
yeah,
like three in the middle that like
right.
are stationary and the two on the end are going, but they
Yeah,
can
there's
get
that
out
one
of sync.
too. But yeah, so it's the
Oh, this is different than that.
yeah,
We're
it's
gonna have to like
right.
pull up a visual or
I
something.
know. We need to look up what this thing is. I believe that's kind of the effect that we're seeing with women in the menstrual cycles, syncing up like as you say. Um I think that uh for some women their menstrual cycle is very regular, and then for some women it's more variable just because their bodies are more sensitive to the environment. And so and I think but so that kind of is the evidence for the women don't sync up. But then also women release pheromones. We're sensitive to each other, so maybe there is evidence for us having an effect on one another. As I said, I don't know if there's really been any studies done on this.
Sure.
So it would be fascinating to see if there are,
I
and to
think
see.
my
Who
intuition
knows.
says, for what it's worth, like, have you ever heard of like mycelium? which is like the
The
way that mushrooms talk to each
Oh,
other.
sure.
It's almost
Okay,
like
yeah.
nature's internet.
Sure.
Like if you think of like the Avatar movie or something, where
Okay.
like there's like this, nature is all interconnected and interrelated. When you study that stuff, like there's so much we still don't know. Like people have like reverse engineered certain mushrooms to be able to like do amazing things, like taking
Mhm,
care of um termite issues or whatever. Like
mhm,
it's just because nature is talking to each other in a way that like even like plants, like they know if they're creating their own child, and they know if there's other things encroaching in the environment that are outside of their family, and they'll
mhm,
release chemicals to like protect their children and to like
mhm,
stave off potential predators, like even in the plant kingdom.
mhm.
And like everything is so connected,
Yeah.
and in ways that I think like, I like to joke sometimes. It's like we need modern studies to prove ancient realities, like some
Mhm,
things that used to be common sense. And I'm not saying that to make light of what we're saying about the biology here. I just think like I would not at all be surprised if there is something to, even just in terms of like productivity. They say like you become like the five people you spend the most time with,
mm,
in terms of like the habits that you pick
yeah.
up and everything else. To what extent that connects on a biological level would be super interesting
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
have more insight.
Yeah, I mean, it's God has imbued intelligence into nature that is just it is so fascinating to learn, and that's the point of science is to learn more about the qualities that God has put into nature. But yeah, yeah, it's amazing.
And you know what? One thing that I think is really amazing too, like when you conclude your work, you tie it all together. And I want to actually just quote it here for a second. Um, you say in our technology based economy, is it okay if I just read from
Yeah.
it? Okay, cool. In our technology based economy, the voice of the feminine can be hard to hear. Lucy Pierce in Moontime articulates why modern work schedules can be so draining. Quote, work weeks follow a pattern of 5 days of work and 2 days of rest. This is fine for men, but a woman's natural pattern is 3 weeks on, 1 week off, unquote. And when I read that, I was like, that intuitively makes so much sense to me
Mm,
on so many levels. Like, like you and I have talked offline a little bit, like, and I mentioned about a bunch of these different social justice popes and the works that they wrote about the natural law. And I think a strong case can be made that the church says like, hey, if you're a woman who's of childbearing age and you actually are bearing children, that's like a sign according to nature that you ought to you nurture and mother. And the fact that you mentioned like you have a higher sense of a connection to emotions than men do,
mm,
that's not a bad thing. That's certainly not an inferior thing. It's a different thing. It's a
mhm,
complementary thing. And
mhm,
the purpose is to be able to emote for your children and
mhm,
to build up their psychological resilience
mm,
through that experience.
mm,
And so that's just one example of how I wonder sometimes when you take a look at the snapshot of how society has developed in just the last century or even half of a century, as opposed to how it was throughout most of human history.
mhm,
Like, it's a striking difference.
mhm.
And of course I'm speaking about men and women being in the workplace. As you finish this paragraph, right after that what I just read, it says, suddenly great thinkers like G.K. Chesterton do not seem so outlandish in their opposition to women being employed in certain professions. Now, I love G.K. Chesterton. I used to teach at Chesterton. I'm a Chesterton former teacher. I don't know the context around that specific quote to know
Mhm,
like if he granularizes like what professions make more sense or not. Maybe you can speak to
mhm,
that. But I think the overarching idea that I get from that is like, if women are on a fundamentally different cycle than men,
mm,
like maybe we're not called to the exact same like life experiences as each other. And the more that we try to say like we're the same,
mhm,
maybe we're doing a disservice
mhm,
to, of course, the
mhm.
feminine genius and just that complementarity.
Yeah, so I definitely raise those questions in the conclusion, kind of those bigger questions, taking a step back. Many voices in our society are saying one thing, you know, maybe let's take a step back and think about things on a broader level. Um, yeah, thinking about the majority of thinking about human history and the way things have developed. So to talk about Chesterton specifically, he had an essay entitled "Women in the Workplace," I believe is was part of the title. It might have been a longer title, but if you Google "women in the workplace," you'll
You'll
find
find
it.
it. Okay.
And basically, what he is saying in that essay is that a woman is geared towards the whole person. Edith Stein, yeah, Edith Stein said, a woman is naturally geared towards what is living, personal, and whole. And so I think this is what G.K. Chesterton was touching on as well, was that women are geared to what is whole and what is complete. We can be technical, but we're less inclined to be technical. When we Alice von Hildebrand is also a great Catholic philosopher. She said that when women enter a room and there's a computer and there's a baby, a woman is always going to go to the baby. The men enter, they go to the computer because it's fun or whatever.
Sure.
What the woman goes to what is living, personal, and whole. And so Chesterton touches on this in his essay. And he says that, in a needle factory, that was the example that he gave. Um, you know, they, his a colleague boasted that it took 20 men to produce a needle or whatever. And Chesterton, says maybe that isn't something to be proud of. That, what part of the needle did you work on? Did you work on a 20th part, or did you only work, he says, no, women are geared towards what is whole. You're making at home, you can sew a whole garment to clothe your whole child. For example, you're not, in a factory, you're working on one specific thing and you're doing it over and over again. You're not working on the whole of the product from beginning to end and seeing the result of the fruits of your labor. That doesn't happen in a factory. And so he says, um, practically speaking, women work and women produce, but the nature of woman is geared to what is, as Edith Stein says, what is living, personal, and whole. And so in my own experience, I understand exactly what he meant, because in one of my jobs, I worked in an orthodontic laboratory. And when I started at that lab, I was crafting the medical devices that orthodontists use to expand people's palates and do all that kind of thing in the mouth. So I was making these medical devices, and it was very much like a craft. And because you have to take the template of the child's mouth, you have to shape the components to fit that mouth specifically. It's a very your teeth are
Unique.
it's very unique. Your teeth are like your fingerprint. So it has to be done by hand, and it always will have to be done by hand. um, and and it's a craft, so you kind of um, I was manufacturing these devices one at a time, start to finish. Um, but our but the management at the lab wanted to um, change production. They wanted to increase production. They wanted to speed up
Got to
production.
get that
They
profit.
had, yes. So I was seeing. So I was like reading, G.K. Chesterton, reading some of these things, and I'm like, I'm seeing this in real time. That these forces of industrialization were coming into this. And so I was no longer crafting the whole appliance from beginning to end. I was just doing one. They changed our system into an assembly line system, and so I was doing one piece of it, and I was doing that over and over again, and then sending it off to somebody else. They would do one part, somebody else would do one part. And so I was seeing what G.K. Chesterton was saying real time. And I definitely preferred the crafts the craftswoman aspect of it, where I am crafting this thing for this specific child from start to finish. That was wholesome. That was that was satisfying to me, you know. And then when it changed to an assembly line production, um, it lost that. You know, it, and then if something would go wrong with the appliance, it would have to be sent back, and then there's this kind of like there's this you know, maybe like begrudgingness amongst the team. When somebody does something wrong, then everybody has to start over with the appliance has to get sent back and everybody has to work on it again. So it was just a completely different atmosphere. It was a completely different um way of doing things. And so in that sense, I could see what G.K. Chesterton was saying. And so I can see how so Edith Stein also says that any profession in which a woman can express her femininity is a feminine profession. And so for me, I could see how my work itself in real time kind of went from feminine to masculine, to use the kind of metaphysical, you know,
Yeah, I see what you
level of
mean.
things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it kind of went from a wholesome craft to a assembly line all about production. And so I'm not saying, I'm not knocking masculinity in that you're always about you know, the bottom line.
Well, sometimes, you know, like we could be linear thinkers.
Sure.
I think that would be why we would gravitate to the computer,
Yep.
to use your previous example.
Yep.
And you know, and you need both. You know, like women
Yes.
when they're
Yes.
mothering children, like you've got multiple things going on at the same time. Men are not good at that.
Yeah.
Like by and large, you know, and if there's exceptions out there, exceptions always just end up pointing to the rule.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it's just it is what it is. And you know, I love the way that you drew that out, because it speaks further to like my overarching point that I think that what's happened over the last number of decades, it's just like so like I don't even think we realize all of the implications of these massive changes that have happened in society. Industrial revolution was a huge one of them.
Yeah.
You know, the factory like assembly line work that came out with Ford, and all of this, like, you know, one of the heresies, to use a strong word, heresy is just another word for error, erroneous thinking, erroneous belief. According to Catholic teaching, is utilitarianism. And utilitarianism is it's basically the product of it is whenever you go to one of these plazas and there's a ton of boxes, right? There's all these buildings that are just box shaped. And it's like, it's utilitarian. It's like, hey, it's protecting you from the elements. You can go be a good consumer, get your product off the shelf, and you're done.
Yeah.
That's the transaction.
Yeah.
And it's like, but beauty, the transcendence that comes from, you know, truth, goodness, and beauty, because they're all interrelated, that's the truth. Like that's what's good. That's what we want. That's the expression of humanity as opposed to utilitarianism. And so when you introduce this like factory mentality, I mean, some men thrive in that environment, but I know some people, you know, whether you're a man or not, they can't handle that. Like it's just not for them, because you're losing the whole for the part.
Right.
Right. So it's just, you know, as a thinker, I just sometimes I look at these things and I'm like, you know, it's one thing to have this conversation. It would be interesting to see, because I love being solution focused. Okay, like you see the thing, you know, we got to like impact people that have sway over building these buildings or something, because that would be seeing the change actually take place. But you know, it starts one bit at a time. And then the other thing, it's a little bit out of the scope of being a young woman, but you know, young women, the majority will ultimately be called to the marital vocation, and then it does become pertinent for them. You know, like when you are mothering the child, it's not that you can't work. Obviously, the archetype of a good woman is Proverbs 31. You read Proverbs 31 and the woman's in the marketplace, she's working.
Yeah.
But it's like time and place. And I think G.K. Chesterton is famous for saying this elsewhere. Like, there is nothing more rewarding than you could possibly do than to nurture a human being.
Yeah.
Like the vocation of a mother is such that you have every single hat of every single career that there
Yeah.
is. You're
Yeah.
the barber if you want to be. You're the
Yeah.
lawyer, you're the judge, the
Yeah.
jury, the executioner, the teacher, the educator, the cook, the like you're
Right.
every vocation.
Right.
And you
Yeah.
have the capacity to form another human as part of being that creator of the whole.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that is like I is there anything more dignified
Right.
than giving life?
Right. Right.
So these are the kinds of things that we should keep in mind and
Yeah.
foster
Yeah.
and appreciate about each other and complement each other.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's I think that education is important for women too, especially who want to be mothers, because you're gonna be forming the whole of a human person. And so having having good fruits of your mind to pass down is very valuable.
yeah, yeah. And I really appreciate how, your story that you've shared with us today is it has a lot of moving parts. Like you took on this biology degree, but you also took on entrepreneurialism in a certain sense.
Mm,
You figured out how to do something that was way above the scope of like what your career would, teach you to do. And I think
mm,
that's the story of most people that are going to get a college education. A lot of times the college education gives you this one little piece of the whole puzzle,
mm,
and it doesn't give you the holistic like application. And as you had said, you started going on this journey, and there were different pieces to this. Part of it
mm,
was recognizing like I think that there's important information that can be conveyed in a way that you're able to take something very mysterious
mm,
and make it relatable,
mm,
and we need to convey that in a manner that empowers people, women specifically, to be able to maximize their potential.
mhm,
That's super
mhm.
cool.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, I hope so. I hope it helps. I hope it helps women understand themselves. I hope it helps women, yeah, kind of take a step back and maybe listen to their bodies a little bit, and find kind of find their path forward in understanding themselves, respecting themselves, and um, holding others to a standard of understanding and respect, and that hopefully can better society.
I did my little bit just now about like utilitarianism, and then okay, this is the concept, but how do you actually concretize it in society?
Yeah.
When you mentioned the reflection here with the quote about a woman's work rhythm would be like 3 weeks on, 1 week off.
Hmm.
How do you think we could actually do that?
I know.
I wonder.
I don't know. I don't know. I think taking taking retreat. So if you are a young woman working a 9 to 5, um maybe in the evenings taking some retreat time during your um during the different phase of your cycle. You know, during so your period is the time of rest and renewal, but oftentimes women are feeling the emotion, they're feeling the stress during the premenstrual, which is the luteal phase. And so,
Summer.
summer, yes. And so maybe you need to take a rest day or take a retreat day, or in the evenings spend time in adoration during your luteal phase, as opposed to your as opposed to autumn. So whatever works for you as an individual, um, and just if you have a schedule, you have a work schedule, whatever it is, kind of bringing that mentality into your life, I think is helpful just as a start. And so if you have that mentality, then maybe you will naturally develop habits. You maybe will naturally develop a rhythm underneath your schedule that can help you foster better understanding, better holistic communion, even within yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
And it happened organically over the course of our conversation here, where we're making the reference to the different seasons.
Yeah.
Do you have any like specific advice for mothers
Hmm.
or for whatever woman or even maybe the father that would uh, find themselves in the scenario where they need to help a young girl
Mhm.
who is going through the beginning of her menstrual cycles
Mhm.
to, like what do you recommend in terms of like obviously giving her the information, empowering her with an understanding that she is valued and dignified in the eyes of God, and that
Mhm.
this is a part of life, that when you tap into it, knowledge is power, and that you can make the most of it. um I think a part of it is just, you learn this and then you speak in reference to the seasons, but like what does that actually look like right at that moment where, like, is it
Yeah.
before the young girl starts to have her cycles? Like what does that look like?
I think it depends on the family. I think it depends on what your family dynamic is. I'm super introverted. I'm reserved. But I remember when I first started my period, my grandmother told her water aerobics class. She was like, she was so proud of me, and she said that I had started my period. So, even though I am so reserved, and I maybe normally would have been embarrassed in that kind of situation, the fact that she was proud of me, really helped me and help bolster my confidence. So, however, your family dynamic is, whether, it is, um, yeah, using the language of the seasons to kind of say, oh, you're in autumn, or you're in spring, or you're in summer. Maybe you're in summer, you need to take a break, um, or, whatever it is. And I think allowing the young girls um to see that encouragement, I think, is the biggest thing. It may not be, some parents would love to sit down. My mom, loved to sit down and go through the science with us. She's a dentist, so she kind of has a medical background a little bit. And so she loved to like go through she she would have loved to sit down and go through the textbook aspect of all this. And she did. The the she explained the anatomy and physiology to us at a young age. And so that's what worked for our family. And then other families, it may just be, when a girl receives her first period, um, gifting her with my book. You can get it on Amazon.
So check it out on Amazon. And do you have a website?
I do have a website. It is womenofallseasons.com.
Really?
Yes.
I gotta check that out. I haven't been on it yet.
Yeah.
Cool. What
Yeah.
can people find on there?
So you can find a link to the Amazon
Hmm.
right at the top. It says buy the book. And then you can also find a brief kind of synopsis of the book going through the different seasons. And then you can find links to all of my other socials, I guess you could call it. I have Instagram and Substack, and a YouTube playlist. So on Substack, I actually get to put all of my tangential thoughts that are related to womanhood and femininity broadly, but not related to the book. And all that and is on the website. So it's womenofallseasons.com.
Women of
Um,
all seasons.
yeah. Yeah, maybe just simply gifting her with materials and feminine supplies and stuff like that. And having, some quiet encouragement, whatever is, appropriate for that girl. And yeah, being open to the Holy Spirit, guiding you in the education of your children, because everybody's different, every kid is different. So
Yeah, for me, being raised by a woman, it was, the extent of it was, "Hey, son, go get me a feminine product."
mm,
And it was like, and I was just like, "Yeah, this is just how I take care of my mom." And I,
mm,
I think that was kind of like the extent of what I understood about it. But like, I don't know. I just think that men in particular might be able to play more of a role in this. Like, do you have any maybe like advice specifically for the fathers in relationship to that?
that's a great question. My dad was very encouraging. He was also very, very proud of me. I told him I received my first period, and he's like very happy. And that was very much his personality. Um, yeah, I'm probably gonna be learning from my husband. My husband is also very reserved, and so I'm probably gonna be learning from him how he fathers our daughters, and seeing what is comfortable for him. And he's very like he's very open to all this, obviously. And so, um, but seeing how he goes about it in his own way, it's gonna be a great journey. But yeah, so for fathers, I think just being encouraging, just being like, just saying that that's great, and that's encouraging your daughter going into her womanhood. You love your wife, you love your daughter's mother, so encouraging your daughter in that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And I have to say, by the way, I wouldn't have known right off the bat that she was introverted because you were
Yeah.
like, you should have me on
Yeah.
your podcast.
Yeah.
And my
Yeah.
wife and I were like, I think I'm going to talk about menstrual cycles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, we're
You're
going to
gonna
do
go,
this.
yeah, go
Yeah.
out on a limb. Yeah.
Yes.
I so appreciate it. No,
Yeah.
I listened to a talk from like somebody from Students for Life who coached other pro-life students, and they said that it's often the introverts who are really good at advocating and really good at getting other students involved in like whatever pro-life group they have on campus. That was just where I heard it. But introverts, I think, can tend to be like goal oriented a little bit more when it comes to social interactions. So as an extrovert, you're talking to everybody about everything, and then as an introvert, I'm thinking, okay, I have this thing that I want, I have this goal, and I'm gonna go there, and so it's like I'm
Yes.
gonna go out on a limb, and it's for that goal. So
I'm really
so
grateful that you
here
did
we
that.
are. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was super
I'm very
cool.
grateful for you having me on here.
Oh, 100%, 100%. It's super interesting. It's empowering. And also just, it speaks to my heart as a life coach as well. And a pro-life person, by the way. Like I had my comeuppance, like, I ended up like on all the local media when, in 2017, when it was at the time Pence was the first vice
Mm.
president ever to show up. At that point, a president had never showed up. So the media was suddenly interested.
Oh,
And I
to
was just,
the March for Life, you
yeah, to
mean?
go to the
Oh,
March for
okay, I see.
Life. And they were just like, so what are you guys doing over here? And I'm just like, we're
Mm.
just standing up for the sanctity of life. And it
That's
was just,
funny.
it was kind of a surreal experience. But because obviously it's controversial for some people, even though to us it's common sense. It's like
Mm.
life is, I mean, the building block of everyone's existence and your ability to experience any and all gifts that you ever have starts with the gift of life.
Mm.
And it has to be fostered, it has to be nurtured at every single stage. At which
Mm.
and I know I'm speaking to the reverend if we were Protestant preachers here right now, but like, being pro-life is from the womb to the tomb.
Mm.
And so it's not just about hyper focusing on one specific issue. Like, of
Mm.
course, giving birth, it's what we're doing right now.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
It's, accompanying people in the twilight years of their life. It's the
Mm.
whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I'm very, very thankful for, again, the niche that you have identified here so that, and obviously we've both made very clear that we're practicing Catholics, but for anyone of faith,
Mm.
for anyone, of the mind that life is a gift,
Mm.
just to be able to recognize like, hey, this is a part of the feminine genius. This is a part of being a girl. This is a part of, if you're attuned to these rhythms, it gives you the opportunity, this is the life coach in me coming out again, to like maximize your potential.
Yeah.
And it takes all of us, in my opinion. You know what I
Mm.
mean? It
Mm.
can't just be half of the team,
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
so I really appreciate you sharing your story. I appreciate you sharing your work here.
Thank
It's
you.
important work. I highly recommend, again, you can check it out on Amazon.
Yes, on Amazon.
Woman of All Seasons, Annie Schuler.
Right.
Any closing words of wisdom?
No, all glory to God, I would say. There you go.
Amen. Amen. Ad maiorem Dei gloriam. And if you enjoy content like this, please comment, be a part of the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, please like, subscribe, share. And if you'd like to get involved in life coaching, check out therichddawn.com for anyone who'd like to call. It's 716-PRO-LIFE. And God bless you.